All right, so today you're going to be looking at comparing and ordering rational numbers. So on this first slide, which of these represents the greatest amount? So when you look at them, you need to think, how can I put them all in the same order so that they can all be done exactly in the same number types? So fractions like fractions, decimals like decimals, or percents like percents. In this problem, you're probably going to want to go to all percents. So if you put them all as percentages, 62%, 1/2 becomes 50%, 0.58 becomes 58%, and 3/6 becomes 50%. You can clearly see that your largest number is 62%. Moving on to problem solving. With problem solving, I'm going to read my problem first, and then for this one, I'm going to draw a picture. A deck from which a diver descended was 7.5 feet above sea level. A diver descended 8 3/4 feet from the deck into the sea. What depth did the diver reach? So for me, I see sea level as being 0. I see a deck with a diver at plus 7.5 feet above sea level. I see the diver diving into the water, so going negative 8 3/4 feet down from the 7.5. So when you're going down, that represents subtracting. So because I have one positive and one negative, I'm going to decide on my sign first. So I know there's more in 8 3/4. So I know that my problem is going to equal a negative number. And when I have one of each, I'm going to take my larger number and subtract my smaller number. I know that I need common denominator, so I can see that between these two, my common denominator is going to be 4, so that fraction is going to stay. My next fraction is going to be fourths, so 2 times 2 is 4, so this one's going to change to 2/4, 1 times 2. And when I subtract, I get 1 1/4. So my final answer is going to be negative 1 1/4 feet. Today's lesson work is going to be on comparing and ordering. So on Friday, we worked on changing all of our numbers into all fractions or all of our numbers into all decimals. So when I do that, I'm going to start with my negatives first. So I'm highlighting those. And then after that, I'm going to look at what's my biggest number, positive 2 3/4, and what's my smallest number, negative 2 2/3. And I'm going to number my number line from there. So I'm going to choose to skip every other one as well as put in just whole numbers up to 2 because I don't have very big numbers here. So when I go to start placing these, I am going to do my negatives first. So I already put an arrow by negative 2 2/3, which is the same as 2.66. So I know that this is at the halfway point right here. And I know 66 is on the other side of that. So I'm going to put a dot on my number line and label it 2 2/3. That one's done. Then I have negative 1.75. I know that's going to be somewhere between negative 1 and negative 2. And I know right here is my half, or 0.5, 0.50. So negative 1.75 is somewhere in between. About halfway, exactly. So that one is done. Negative half happens to fall right on the halfway between the 0 and the negative 1. I want to make sure I label it. And then negative 0.30, because I can add a 0 here, is going to be a little closer to 0 than that half, so negative 0.3. And all my negative numbers are taken care of. For my positives, these are become a little easier. I have 0.6, so I know that halfway is about right here, so that's 0.5. So 0.6 is on the other side. And then 2 3/4 is the same as 2.75 or 75 cents on the dollar. If this is halfway, 2.75 is that halfway point between 2.50 and 3, the whole number 3. And I want to write that as 2 3/4. Moving on to comparing. When I compare two negative numbers, think of them as positives and then switch your thinking. Or if you have another method, go ahead. When I look at two positives that are two negatives that are fractions, I want to make sure my denominators are the same. In this case, they are. They're both 7. So when I look at those, my original thinking is, oh, 6 is bigger. But when I have negative numbers, I want to think what's closest to 0. And negative 4 is closer to 0, so that makes negative 4/7 a bigger fraction. Same thing when I'm comparing two decimals. Both negative, I want to think which one's closer to 0. So, because this one is a 9 and this one is a 2, the decimals don't even matter because I automatically know that 2 is closer to 0. So on these next couple slides that are not the I do, that are the we do's, I want you guys to pause the video and then come back to it and check your work. You're going to do them all like you do since I'm not here. So go ahead and pause the video now and give yourself a few minutes with a partner. So do this with a partner, even though we wouldn't if I was here. And then you're going to check your work. All right, so now you should have done this with a partner. So you're going to come back and you're going to look at these first. I can see that 5/9 and 2/3 do not have a common denominator. So you should have, with your partner, made a common denominator of 9. 3 goes into 9 3 times, so 2 times 3 is 6. Remembering these are both negative values, I know that 5 is closer to 0, so 5/9 is larger. When I look at these two numbers, I can automatically see that the ones are the same, but the 0 and the other one are not. So that's where I do my comparing. They're both negatives. So I think which is closer to 0, and 0 is closer to 0. Put the following in order from least to greatest. Again, I like to do negatives first, positives second. If that's not the way you did it, that's okay. But with your partner, you should have decided, and by the way, this is a typo. I'm sorry. That should be 0.66. You are going to have to change 5/6 into a decimal, which is the work we did on Friday. I know 6 goes into 58 times. So on Friday, I would have told you, oh, you need to work all the way through at least 3 decimal places. But I can automatically see that this 0.8, negative 0.8, and negative 0.6 can be compared. Negative 0.6 is closer to 0, so I know that negative 5/6 is the smallest number. Negative 0.66 is next, and now I move into my positives. 2/3 is one of these fractions you just need to know is 0.66. And when I compare it to 0.6, I need to rewrite that as 0.60. So 0.60 is smaller, and then 2/3 will be your largest fraction. All right. I want you guys to do the rest of this work as partners, and then maybe together as a class you can talk about putting these in order from least to greatest and then putting these and comparing them. So after you finish these 2 slides as a class, I want you guys to go over what you think your answers are.